8 additional relief aid trucks are expected to make their way to Gaza this afternoon. The United Nations announced that the large vehicles consisting of food, medicine and water. However, some officials have warned that technical, political and security issues are delaying these deliveries. Now, this comes amid ongoing discussions with Israel to allow more humanitarian crossings into the densely populated, war-torn Gaza. Right, and now I'm joined by Professor Thomashausen, a professor of international law at the University of South Africa. Prof, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, good evening. It's a pleasure. Good evening, listeners and viewers.
Thank you. I mean, just on that, as I was saying in the introduction, that the big issue now seems to be humanitarian aid and the concerns that it might just not be happening the way it should. What's your take on that and how it is being handled?
Well, the European Union, that was standing 100% by Israel, just like the United States, today, this morning, after their meeting of 27 heads of state, has become very much more cautious and is demanding a respect for humanitarian law and the opening of avenues to get humanitarian aid through to the civilian population. And of course, worldwide, people are getting increasingly alarmed at the suffering of the civilian population in Gaza. And this brings to my mind that these sieges, which used to date back in history to the siege in the Battle of Megiddo between Egypt and the Canaanites, and then Battle of Vienna, and then Siege of Ceuta, which lasted 50 years, and then, of course, the infamous siege of Leningrad, now called St. Petersburg, which lasted nearly 2 years and killed 3 million people, that these sieges don't work because they assume that the civilian population and their suffering could influence the decision of the policymakers or of the people that are armed and active, and those people aren't moved by the suffering of anybody.
The way the EU is handling this situation, I mean, is it a question of concern in that they have almost taken the side that the United States has taken also?
That was the initial position. The position has changed as of today. The EU is demanding access for humanitarian aid and is calling on restraint. Of course, the Israeli Defense Force says we cannot possibly hope to save the lives of the hostages if we do not destroy Hamas command centers and heavily equipped and armed Hamas tunnels.
Is there, though, Prof, an opportunity for a proper conversation, lack of a better phrasing, to try and deal with these issues, particularly when you talk about the issues of hostages and the letters that are yet to be given to these hostages to at least allow them some sort of passage? Is there room for those sort of conversations to happen?
Well, there is a plan in progress which is highly contentious and very dangerous, where the Russians, together maybe with the help of Iran and Qatar, are trying to broker a situation. Turkey apparently is also supporting it, where the hostages would somehow be transferred, probably secretly by sea, to Turkey and from Turkey to Iran. And then, of course, one will have to assume that these hostages will never come home again. They will stay and linger in some jails in Iran for the next 40 years as a means to extort compromises from the West. So this is no solution. It's not a humanitarian solution. It is not something that anybody would wish for their father or grandfather or child if they were held captive as hostages. Hostage taking is a war crime. It's a very serious war crime. And Palestine has signed the Geneva Conventions and the protocols pertaining to it. And under Article 3, hostage taking is a severe war crime. And this rule has been adhered to, has been signed by 195 states. So this is a crucial issue in the midst of this conflict, because Gaza is part of the state of Palestine. It's a Palestinian territory. So the state of Palestine is responsible for what happens on its territory. And the state of Palestine should be assisting every possible effort to save the lives of these hostages.
But then in terms of interventions that we are seeing, either directly or indirectly, can one say that enough is being done, particularly by the world superpowers, as it were, or is the area of concern in that one way or the other they have taken a side or chosen a side in this impasse?
We cannot expect from international more than what it does, which is to set standards and to lay down rules for people to hopefully comply by them. There's no international police. There's no enforcement that could see to it that something happens. So the rest is left to the consents of countries, and I don't think anybody would be prepared to consider, for instance, positioning a big peacekeeping force, maybe a division a division made up of American and Russian and Iranian soldiers in the middle of Gaza. It cannot happen. So there has to be a lot of political pressure on the few people that represent Hamas, with whom one can talk and who hopefully will have the authority to actually make something happen, to actually be respected by those crazed people. They are crazy people. They went and slaughtered 1,400 people. That's the current count, with hammers and axes and knives. They cut off limbs. They did incredible things in an orgy of violence. Now, who will they listen to? Who actually commands them? Probably not the known leader of Hamas, who lives in Doha, in Qatar, in great luxury as an immensely rich person. He probably wouldn't be listened to by those people who live underground under incredible circumstances in some hidden tunnels. So it is also a military challenge, and I think Israel is trying to avoid excessive civilian casualties by having insisted that the civilian population must clear that area. They must move south so that the operations can be conducted to hopefully find these hostages.
Oh, it sounds, though, Prof, that this issue can only be solved by the gun. Am I right by saying that if the superpowers, the world leaders, are unable to assist, and you have movements like the Red Cross not being able to intervene or offer help, or at least being restricted in some of these areas, does it honestly say that the only way to solve this is by the barrel of the gun?
That is what Israel is convinced of. Russia has taken the initiative, the very daring and difficult initiative of allowing 2 or 3 Hamas commanders to come to Moscow to discuss, to negotiate, for people to understand what would satisfy Hamas, what could be offered for Hamas to free the hostages. At this stage, there seem to be unreasonable demands, like the release of 7,000 Palestinians, and nobody knows what their current status is, whether they're really prisoners or whatever. So if there are reasonable demands, I think the region, the other countries, Kuwait, for instance, has been very reasonable, and so has Egypt, and so has Saudi Arabia. They've all used a lot of restraint. They could maybe pull it off to have a regional conference that includes a representation by Hamas and, of course, a representation of the legitimate government of Palestine, which is not Hamas, and that one discusses the real issue, which is how are the Palestine people supposed to enjoy their right to development, supposed to have a future if they don't have a territory, if half of that population for decades already is living in tent cities, in refugee camps, where they're not allowed to move freely, where they're not allowed to work, where they have very limited opportunities to study or to further themselves. That is a situation that the region can only solve. And there's enough land in that region. The country Jordan, for instance, is immense. It's a huge territory, and it's currently governed by a very small minority, the Hashemite tribe. So, and there's a lack of democratic representativity in those countries. So there should be a regional conference, but that's not a short-term solution. It can take months, and over that time, I fear the lives of those hostages
clearly there would be
will just be
way
lost.
too many lives being lost as the number stands at around 7,000. Professor under Thomashausen, thank you very much for coming through to talk to us. Prof. Thomashausen is a professor of international law at the University of South Africa, just looking at the issue of Hamas and, of course, Gaza.